slapped her so hard her earring flew across the dance floor. His mother told 300 guests
This
her own
unfortunate
behavior
scene was
had
provoked
him.
entirely by her
His
own
mistress,
behavior this
wearing
evening.
a dress his wife's money had paid for, didn't even flinch. The woman standing there, bleeding into her torn gown, said nothing, because the truth she carried was worth more than $90 billion. And tonight, she chose not to use it. The Monarch Royale Hotel sat on the edge of downtown like a palace made of glass and gold. 300 guests filled its grand ballroom that Saturday evening. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. A live jazz band played soft melodies near the stage. Waiters in white gloves floated between round tables draped in ivory linen. Candles flickered inside glass hurricanes at every centerpiece. The air smelled of roses, expensive cologne, and ambition. It was the wedding reception of the year, the union of the Holloway family's youngest son, and every seat was filled with people who came to be seen. Denise Holloway sat at the family table near the back, not the center, not the front, the back. She wore a champagne-colored gown she had sewn herself from fabric she bought on sale 2 months earlier. The stitching was invisible. The fit was flawless. But nobody noticed. Nobody ever noticed Denise. She sat with her hands in her lap and her posture perfectly still while the women around her dripped in designer labels and borrowed confidence. That was the role she had been given in this family. Present but invisible, and for 15 years she had played it without a single complaint. Her husband, Marcus Holloway, was on the other side of the ballroom. He moved through the crowd like a man who believed he owned the building, shaking hands, slapping backs, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. He wore a custom charcoal suit that cost more than their monthly mortgage, and a watch he had financed over 36 months. But appearances were Marcus's specialty. He had spent his entire adult life constructing the image of a man who was more than he actually was. And tonight, under the chandelier light, surrounded by people who didn't know the difference, the illusion held. And right beside him, close enough to share his shadow, was Vanessa Cole. She had been introduced to every guest that evening as Marcus's business partner. She wore a floor-length emerald gown that hugged every curve, diamond earrings that caught the light with each tilt of her head, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Vanessa carried herself like she belonged at the head table, like she had earned her seat, but everything she wore, every stitch, every stone, every thread of silk, had been funded through accounts she didn't understand. Accounts rooted in a trust she had never heard of, a trust that belonged to the quiet woman sitting alone at the back of the room. Marcus's mother, Gloria Holloway, sat at the head table like a queen holding court. She wore a wide-brimmed lavender hat, a matching silk suit, and a disposition colder than January. Gloria had never accepted Denise. Not from the very first Sunday Marcus brought her to dinner. She told her friends that Denise had no ambition. She told her relatives that Denise had no class. She told her son more than once, in that sharp, quiet voice only mothers know how to use, that he had married beneath him. And tonight, surrounded by 300 witnesses and a microphone within arm's reach, Gloria was in her element. It started with something small. Denise rose from her seat and crossed the ballroom toward Marcus. She didn't storm. She didn't rush. She simply walked, steady, calm, with the kind of quiet dignity that made a few people instinctively look up from their plates. She reached Marcus near the bar and touched his elbow gently. Denise's fingers had barely brushed Marcus's sleeve when a soft laugh cut in from his other side. Vanessa stepped closer, not rushed, not startled, but deliberate, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Oh," she said lightly, tilting her head as if noticing Denise for the first time. "I didn't realize staff were allowed on the floor during the reception." A small ripple of laughter passed through the group around them. Not loud, not cruel enough to be called out, just enough to land. Denise didn't react. Vanessa's eyes moved slowly over Denise's gown, the hand-stitched seams, the simple fabric, the quiet elegance that didn't scream for attention. "That's sweet," she added, smiling faintly. "Did you make that yourself?" Another soft chuckle. A glass clinked. Someone leaned in closer to hear the exchange. Marcus didn't correct her. He didn't introduce Denise. He didn't say her name. He just exhaled through his nose, irritation already building. Not at Vanessa, but at the inconvenience of the moment. Denise stood there, her hand still lightly resting against his sleeve, invisible in a space where she should have been undeniable. And then she leaned close and asked, quietly so only he could hear. The question was simple. "Why is she seated at the family table, Marcus? Who is she to you?" Marcus's jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. The smile he had been wearing all night vanished like smoke. He turned toward Denise slowly, and the warmth in his face drained like water through sand. "Sit down," he said through clenched teeth. "Not here." But Denise didn't move. She looked at him, eyes carrying 15 years of silence, 15 years of swallowed questions, 15 years of pretending she didn't see what everyone else in this family could see clearly. "Who is she to you, Marcus?" she asked again, gently. Not with anger, with the kind of exhaustion that only years of invisible suffering can produce. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, someone else looked away. But no one stepped forward. The air in the room tightened. Marcus Holloway, in full view of 300 wedding guests, beneath crystal chandeliers and the warm glow of fairy lights, raised his open hand and slapped his wife across her face. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a branch snapping in a thunderstorm. Denise's earring, a small gold stud she had worn since her grandmother gave it to her, flew from her lobe, skidded across the polished marble floor, and came to rest beneath a stranger's chair. She stumbled sideways. Her hand went to her mouth. Blood pooled between her fingers and dripped onto the front of her champagne gown. The room gasped. Crystal glasses froze midair. The jazz band stopped mid-note. Conversations died in their throats. 300 people stared in absolute silence at the woman bleeding on the ballroom floor. And then Gloria stood up. She didn't rush to her daughter-in-law. She didn't check on her. She walked to the nearest microphone stand, tapped it twice with her manicured finger, and cleared her throat. And with the confidence of a woman who had rehearsed her cruelty long before tonight, she spoke to the entire room. "My daughter-in-law provoked my son. She has been jealous and unstable for months. Marcus is a good man, a patient man. She pushed him to this. I want everyone in this room to know. This was not his fault." The room shifted. Some people nodded. Some looked away. A few of Marcus's friends walked over and patted him on the shoulder like he was the one who'd been wounded. They told him to calm down. They told him she wasn't worth the scene. Not one person, not a single soul out of 300, walked toward Denise. Vanessa didn't move. She sat at the head table with her legs crossed, champagne glass half raised, and watched the entire scene unfold like it was a movie she had already seen the ending to. She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She tilted her head slightly to the left and let a small, private smile cross her lips. The kind of smile that said, "This is exactly where I wanted her." Denise stood slowly, blood still on her lip, one strap of her gown torn. She looked at the marble floor and found her earring. She bent down, carefully, with the quiet grace of someone who had been bending down her whole life, picked it up, and closed it inside her fist. Then she straightened her back. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at Gloria. She didn't look at Vanessa. She turned toward the ballroom doors and walked. No tears, no screaming, no begging. Just the sound of her heels on marble, quiet, steady, and completely alone. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed once inside her clutch. She opened it. A single message from a name no one in that ballroom would recognize. Her attorney. 5 words on the screen. Board confirmed. Awaiting your word. She stared at the message for 3 slow seconds. Then she silenced the phone, dropped it back into her clutch, and kept walking into the night. The ballroom behind her erupted in whispers, but Denise didn't hear them. She was already somewhere else, somewhere far ahead of every person in that room. To understand Denise Holloway, you had to go back, not to the ballroom, not to the blood on the marble. You had to go back 22 years, to a rundown apartment on the east side of Baltimore, where a little girl with braids and second-hand shoes learned that real strength didn't make noise. Her grandmother, Opal Monroe, raised her. Opal was a woman built from prayer, persistence, and an iron will that no circumstance could bend. She cleaned office buildings 5 nights a week, arriving after dark, leaving before dawn. On Saturday mornings, she sold sweet potato pies from a folding table outside the corner store, wearing the same apron she'd had for 20 years. Her hands were rough. Her knees ached when it rained. Her back hurt every single morning. But she never complained. Not once. Not to Denise. Not to God. She believed that the Lord counted what you carried in silence, not what you announced to the world. Denise's parents died when she was 7. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. A delivery truck ran a red light 3 blocks from their apartment. They were pronounced dead before the ambulance reached the hospital. Opal got the call at work. She finished mopping the floor she was on. Then she clocked out, took the bus home, pulled Denise from the neighbor's couch where she was sleeping, and held her until the sun came up. She didn't have money for therapy. She didn't have words for grief counseling. She had a Bible, a kitchen table, and one rule that she spoke into Denise's life like a commandment. Never let the world see you break, baby. You cry at home. Outside, you stand. That rule became the foundation of everything Denise would ever become. On Denise's 12th birthday, Opal handed her a small gold locket wrapped in a piece of tissue paper. It was dented. The clasp barely held. The chain had been replaced twice, but inside was a photograph of Denise's mother, Lorraine Monroe, smiling in a yellow sundress on a summer afternoon. And tucked behind the photograph was a tiny, folded note written in Lorraine's careful handwriting. It said, 5 words. You are more than what they see. Denise read those words and pressed the locket to her chest so hard it left an imprint. She never took it off again, not once. For 20 years, that locket hung beneath her clothes, hidden from the world, resting against her heartbeat like a second pulse. What Denise didn't know at 12, what Opal never fully explained, because Opal herself barely understood the scope of it, was that Lorraine Monroe was not simply a woman who died too young. Lorraine had been a research chemist, brilliant, methodical, quiet in the way that only deeply intelligent people can be. In her late 20s, working nights in a university lab while raising Denise during the day, she co-developed a pharmaceutical compound that became the biochemical backbone of a global biotech patent. Her research partner commercialized the technology. Lorraine stepped back. She didn't want boardrooms. She didn't want press conferences. She wanted her daughter, her small garden behind the apartment, and her peace. But Lorraine was not reckless with her future. Before she died, she did one thing that would reshape Denise's entire existence. She placed her complete share of the patent, the royalties, the equity stake, the licensing rights across every territory, into a blind trust. She appointed a single attorney as trustee. She named one beneficiary, her daughter, Denise Monroe. The trust was sealed and would remain untouched until Denise turned 18. When Denise was 19, already married to Marcus, already living in a one-bedroom apartment, already working double shifts at a laundromat to cover rent, a man in a gray suit knocked on Opal's apartment door. He carried a leather briefcase, spoke in careful sentences, and sat at the kitchen table where Denise had eaten cereal every morning of her childhood. He explained the trust. He explained the structure. He explained that Denise, the girl who had never owned a new pair of shoes, who ate ramen 5 nights a week, who sewed her own prom dress from fabric scraps, was the sole heir to an estate that was already worth a fortune and growing at a rate that would stagger most financial advisors on Wall Street. Denise sat on the edge of her grandmother's couch and didn't speak for 40 minutes. She didn't scream. She didn't celebrate. She pressed the locket against her chest and whispered one word, "Mama." She never told Marcus. They had met at a community job fair when she was 20. He was charming, restless, and full of plans that sounded like promises. He talked about building empires from nothing. He talked about legacy and vision. He had a wide smile and strong hands and a way of making Denise feel, for the first time since her parents died, like someone was choosing her. They married small, a courthouse ceremony on a Wednesday afternoon, $40 rings from a pawn shop, and a cake from the grocery store bakery. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, or at least Denise believed it was. She kept the trust hidden, not because she didn't love Marcus, but because she needed to answer a question that mattered more to her than money ever could. Would he love her without it? Would he stay if she was just Denise, the woman who made cornbread from scratch and hummed gospel songs while she ironed his shirts? She needed to be enough, just as she was. And so, she said nothing. She let the attorneys manage everything. She let the trust grow in silence while she lived a life that looked nothing like the fortune she carried. Year after year, the trust compounded. The biotech industry exploded globally. Lorraine's patent became the foundation for treatments used in hospitals across 4 continents. Royalties multiplied, equity expanded. New licensing deals opened in countries Denise had never visited. By the time Marcus raised his hand in that ballroom, the trust Denise had never touched was valued at just over $90 billion. The quiet woman in the homemade gown, the one with a bleeding lip and a torn strap, was one of the wealthiest human beings on the planet, and not a single person in her life knew it. The marriage didn't break overnight. It eroded, slowly, quietly, like a riverbank losing ground to water it couldn't stop. Over 15 years, Marcus built a modest real estate company. He flipped houses. He managed a handful of rental properties. He made enough money to buy a decent car, put the kids in a good school, and take one vacation a year. He was comfortable, not wealthy, not powerful, but comfortable. And somewhere along the way, comfortable wasn't enough for Marcus anymore. He started believing his own mythology. He told himself that he had built everything from scratch, that Denise contributed nothing, that she was dead weight he'd been generous enough to carry. And Gloria, with her sharp tongue and her talent for cruelty disguised as concern, reinforced it at every opportunity, at every holiday, every phone call, every whispered aside. She'd be nothing without you, Marcus. Remember that. And Marcus believed it, because it was easier than the truth. The truth was that his business was average, his ambition was louder than his results, and the woman he dismissed at every turn was the only person in his life who had ever loved him without a single condition attached. Vanessa Cole entered the picture 3 years before the wedding slap. She came from Atlanta, or at least that's what she told people. She called herself a real estate investor. She was sharp, stunning, and surgically calculated. She wore confidence like body armor and used flattery like a precision instrument. The night she met Marcus at a networking mixer in a downtown hotel lobby, she identified his 2 greatest weaknesses within 20 minutes of conversation, his ego and his insecurity. And she decided right there, with a glass of red wine in her hand, that she would feed both until he couldn't tell the difference between her voice and his own thoughts. She told him he was brilliant. She told him his potential was limitless. She told him that Denise was an anchor, that a man of his caliber needed a woman who matched his energy, not one who dimmed it. Within 6 months, Marcus was spending more evenings with Vanessa than with his own family. Within a year, the affair was an open secret, known by every relative, every friend, every neighbor, except acknowledged by none. Because in families like the Holloways, you didn't talk about things. You just looked the other way. What Vanessa didn't know, what she never suspected for a single moment, was that the lifestyle she was building around Marcus was funded by a source she couldn't imagine. The designer wardrobe, the luxury dinners, the weekend trips to coastal resorts, the apartment lease in her name. All of it flowed through subsidiary investment accounts that were quietly, invisibly linked to Denise's trust. Vanessa wasn't spending Marcus's money, she was spending his wife's. Every diamond on her ears, every bottle of champagne at her table, every silk dress hanging in her closet. It all traced back to the woman she had replaced. The one who clipped coupons and sewed her own gowns and never said a word. Gloria made everything worse. She invited Vanessa to Sunday dinners. She introduced Vanessa to church friends as Marcus's lovely colleague. She placed Vanessa next to Marcus at the Thanksgiving table and moved Denise to the far end, near the children, as if she were hired help rather than the mother of Marcus's kids. She compared them openly. Vanessa's style, Vanessa's confidence, Vanessa's ambition. While Denise sat at the end of the table with her hands folded and her jaw locked tight. One evening at a summer barbecue, Gloria stood in the backyard surrounded by cousins and aunts and said, loudly enough for Denise to hear through the screen door, "That woman is a charity case, always has been. My son carries her on his back like a sack of flour. Lord knows what he sees in her." The cousins chuckled. Someone clinked a beer bottle. Nobody disagreed. Denise set her plate on the counter, walked inside, locked herself in the bathroom, and pressed her forehead against the cold tile wall. She held the gold locket against her lips and whispered words she had never spoken aloud. "How much longer do I have to be quiet, Grandma? How much longer?" Marcus tightened his financial control, like a man asserting dominance over the one territory he thought he owned. He canceled Denise's credit card. He put her on a weekly cash allowance. He told her if she wanted more, she should get a real job. He didn't know, couldn't have imagined, that the woman standing in front of him, counting dollars at the grocery store, quietly held a fortune that dwarfed the net worth of most families in the entire state. Then came the night that changed everything. Marcus walked into the kitchen on a Tuesday evening while Denise was cooking dinner. He leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and told her, flatly, without a trace of emotion, that he wanted a separation. He said he had outgrown her. He said they wanted different things from life. He said it was better for the kids if they didn't pretend anymore. Vanessa was outside in the driveway, engine running, headlights cutting through the blue dusk like a getaway car. Denise stood at the stove, still holding a wooden spoon. She looked at Marcus for a long time, not with surprise, not with fury, with something far more dangerous than either, recognition. She recognized, clearly, completely, with surgical precision, that the man she had loved for 15 years had never once tried to see her. He looked at her every single day and saw nothing, not because she was empty, because he never bothered to look. She watched him pack a bag. She stood in the hallway and watched him zip it shut. She watched him walk to the front door without turning around. She watched the door close behind him. She heard the car door slam. She heard the engine pull away. And when the sound of the tires faded into the night, something deep inside Denise shifted. A door closed inside her chest, not with a slam, but with a click. The softness she had carried for 15 years hardened into something new. The patience that had defined her thinned into something sharper. The silence changed shape. It was no longer resignation. It was preparation. That night, Denise put the children to bed, kissed their foreheads, and walked into the kitchen. She picked up her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years, the direct line for Raymond Cross, the attorney who had managed her mother's trust since before Denise took her first step. He answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, professional, as if he had been waiting, patiently, for this exact moment. "It's time," Denise said. 5 words. No explanation, no hesitation. Raymond paused for 1 second, then he replied, "I'll activate everything. You'll have the board's full confirmation within the week." Denise hung up the phone, sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 15 years. 10 days passed, 10 quiet, deliberate, carefully planned days. And then the night arrived. The Monarch Grand Hotel hosted the Harrington Foundation annual benefit, the most prestigious charity gala in the city. Black tie, $10,000 a plate, business leaders, politicians, media executives, philanthropists. The ballroom was the same one where Denise had bled on the floor 10 days earlier, the same marble, the same chandeliers. But tonight, the energy in that room was about to shift in a way that 300 of the city's most powerful people would never forget. Marcus was there. Of course he was. He arrived with Vanessa on his arm, both of them tailored, polished, performing. He worked the room the way he always did, firm handshakes, loud laughter, the easy confidence of a man who believed his own press. Vanessa matched him step for step, her emerald eyes scanning the room like a woman calculating the value of every person in it. Gloria sat at a nearby table, hat tilted just so, telling anyone who would listen that her son had finally freed himself from dead weight and was now ready to be the man God intended. The gala moved through its program, opening remarks, a live auction, a jazz quartet. Then the host returned to the podium. He straightened his tie. He adjusted the microphone. And he said something that made every conversation in the room fall silent at once. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special unscheduled presentation this evening. I am honored to introduce the single largest donor in the 23-year history of this foundation. Please welcome the chairwoman of Monroe Biotech Holdings." The ballroom doors opened, and Denise walked in. But this was not the Denise that anyone in that room remembered. She wore a tailored black gown, clean lines, no embellishment, no apology. Her hair was swept back from her face. Her posture was iron and silk at once. Her eyes were steady. And there, resting against her collarbone in full view for the very first time in her life, was the gold locket. The dented, scratched, twice-repaired locket that her grandmother had given her on her 12th birthday, the one she had hidden beneath her clothes for 2 decades. Tonight, she let the world see it. Tonight, she wore her mother's memory on the outside. She was flanked by Raymond Cross, silver-haired, sharp-suited, carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents worth more than most of the companies represented in that ballroom. Behind him walked 2 senior executives from Monroe Biotech Holdings. They moved like a quiet army. The room turned, every head, every eye. Conversations died. Forks hung suspended over plates. The jazz quartet lowered their instruments. 300 people watched Denise Monroe Holloway cross that ballroom floor like she was walking through a cathedral. Marcus saw her first. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. His jaw loosened, his eyes widened. Beside him, Vanessa's practiced smile collapsed like a building losing its foundation. Across the room, Gloria went completely still, the kind of stillness that comes in the half-second before the ground opens beneath you. Denise stepped onto the stage. She stood at the podium and looked out at the room. She didn't scan for Marcus. She didn't search for Gloria. She didn't glance at Vanessa. She simply stood in the light, let the silence gather around her like a cloak, and then she spoke. Her voice was low, calm, steady as a resting heartbeat. My name is Denise Monroe Holloway. Most of you in this room don't know me, but some of you were here 10 days ago. Some of you saw me bleeding on this very floor. Some of you watched, some of you looked away, and not one of you followed me out. The room didn't breathe. I was raised by a woman named Opal Monroe. She cleaned office buildings at night so I could have breakfast in the morning. She sold pies on the weekend so I could have shoes for school. She taught me one thing that I have carried every single day of my life. You never let the world see you break. I have honored that teaching, perhaps for too long. She paused. Her fingers rose and touched the locket at her throat. My mother, Lorraine Monroe, was a research chemist. Before she died, she co-developed a pharmaceutical compound that became the foundation of treatments now used in hospitals across 4 continents. She didn't seek fame. She didn't hold a press conference. She quietly placed her entire legacy into a trust and named one beneficiary: me. The screen behind Denise illuminated. The logo of Monroe Biotech Holdings appeared, clean, bold, unmistakable. Beneath it, a single line of text: sole owner and chairwoman, Denise Monroe Holloway. Raymond Cross stepped forward and addressed the room directly. He presented documentation, trust records, corporate filings, board confirmations, asset statements. Monroe Biotech Holdings was a global pharmaceutical and biotech conglomerate. Its patent portfolio spanned 3 continents. Its annual revenue-funded research grants, hospital wings, and medical infrastructure in 12 countries. Every share, every decision, every dollar, traced back to one person. The woman standing behind that podium, the same woman who had been slapped on this floor 10 nights ago. The room sat in stunned, airless silence. Denise didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She let the truth settle over the room, like a stone dropped into perfectly still water, and she watched the ripples reach every single table. Then she turned, not toward the audience, toward Marcus. She looked at him directly, for the first time since the night he struck her, and she spoke with a calm so devastating it felt like the air in the room had been replaced with something heavier. You slapped me, Marcus, in front of 300 people, for asking a question you didn't want to answer. Your mother took the microphone and told the room I provoked you. Your mistress sat at the head table and smiled. She paused. The silence pressed against the walls. What none of you knew, what I chose not to tell any of you, is that the woman you struck is the sole owner of a fortune that most people on this earth will never come close to imagining. The designer gowns your partner wears, the car she drives, the apartment lease she signed. All of it, every single dollar, flows through subsidiary accounts connected to my trust. She wasn't spending your money, Marcus. She was spending mine. Vanessa's face went chalk white. Gloria's hand trembled around her glass so violently the champagne rippled. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, mouth open, eyes wide, his entire carefully constructed world cracking apart in real time, like glass hit by a stone. Denise took one step closer to the microphone. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every soul in that room heard her. You slapped the woman who could have changed your life, but you never once asked who I was. You only ever told me who I wasn't. She stepped back from the podium. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't wait for gasps. She didn't wait for the room to catch its breath. She turned and walked off the stage with the same steady footsteps she had used to walk out of this ballroom 10 nights ago. Except this time, her lip wasn't bleeding. And this time, she wasn't alone. Raymond Cross followed her. The two executives followed. The ballroom erupted into a low roar of whispers. Marcus sank into his chair like a man watching his own eulogy. Gloria pressed a napkin against her lips with a shaking hand and did not speak another word for the rest of the evening. Vanessa sat perfectly still, staring at the tablecloth, her diamond earrings suddenly feeling heavier than anything she had ever worn. The collapse came fast, not in weeks, not in days, in hours. By midnight, a guest's phone recording of Denise's gala speech was circulating across every social media platform in the city. The video was raw, shaky hands, cocktail noise in the background, but the words were crystal clear. By morning, 3 local news stations had picked up the story. By the end of the week, Marcus Holloway's name had become shorthand for everything a man should never be. Arrogant, blind, and cruel, to the one person who had loved him most. His real estate business crumbled like wet paper. Investors, several of whom had quiet, indirect connections to Denise's philanthropic network, withdrew their capital without explanation. Business partners backed out of pending deals. 2 commercial properties Marcus had been leveraging went into default when his credit lines were frozen. His accountant called him on a Thursday afternoon with numbers that made his hands go cold. Within 3 weeks, Marcus Holloway was sitting alone at his kitchen table, staring at bankruptcy filings in an apartment Vanessa had already emptied and abandoned. He replayed that moment in the ballroom over and over, not the slap, but the second before it, when she had looked at him, and he still chose not to see her. Vanessa disappeared like smoke through a screen door. She packed her belongings the night of the gala and was gone before the sun rose. She didn't answer Marcus's calls. She didn't reply to a single text message. She blocked his number within 48 hours. A month later, someone spotted her in Miami, draped over the arm of a tech company executive, twice Marcus's net worth, wearing the exact same smile she had once aimed at Marcus across a networking event. She had never loved him, not for a single day. She loved proximity to power, and the moment the power shifted, Vanessa shifted with it, smoothly, silently, and without looking back. Gloria's world contracted around her like a closing fist. The relatives who once laughed at her jokes and fought for seats at her dinner table now screened her calls. Her other children, Marcus's own siblings, distanced themselves publicly. One sister posted a statement on social media expressing support for Denise and calling for accountability within the family. Gloria called it betrayal. But the truth was simpler and older than betrayal. People don't stand beside you when the ground you're standing on turns to sand. Gloria called Denise one time, just once. Not to apologize. Gloria Holloway had never apologized for anything in her 71 years of living. She called to ask for help. Her voice came through the phone, thin, stripped bare of its usual commanding authority. She said she was struggling. She said she was having trouble with her bills. She said, without quite saying it directly, that she was terrified of being alone. Denise listened. She listened to every word without interrupting. She let Gloria talk until the talking ran out. And when the silence on the other end stretched long enough to fill an ocean, Denise held the phone for 5 more seconds. Then she gently pressed the red button and hung up. Not with rage, not with satisfaction, not with vengeance. With the quiet understanding that some doors close not because you slam them, but because you simply stop holding them open for people who never once held one open for you. The divorce was brief. Denise filed through Raymond Cross's firm. The proceedings took less than 2 months. She asked for nothing from Marcus. No alimony, no property split, no claim on his dwindling assets. She didn't need a single cent from him. She had never needed it. Marcus sat across from her in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and beige walls and couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. His attorney had nothing to argue. The judge had nothing to consider. The papers were signed in under an hour. When it was finished, Marcus stood in the courthouse hallway and watched Denise walk toward the elevator. Her back was perfectly straight. Her steps were steady and unhurried. The gold locket caught a beam of afternoon light as she turned the corner. And in that moment, standing in a hallway that smelled of old carpet and legal paperwork, Marcus Holloway finally saw his wife. Not the woman he had dismissed for 15 years. Not the woman he had belittled at dinner tables and starved of affection. Not the woman he had struck in front of 300 people. He saw the woman who had been standing in front of him the entire time, patient, powerful, and quietly waiting for him to notice her. And he understood, with a sickness that settled into his bones like winter, that even if he had been given another 15 years, he never would have. The months that followed were quiet. And for the first time in Denise's adult life, quiet didn't mean lonely. It meant free. She went back to East Baltimore. She stood on the sidewalk outside her grandmother's old apartment building. Boarded up now, the bricks darkened with age, the fire escape rusted halfway off the wall. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the front steps. The mailbox hung open on a single screw. But Denise stood there and saw something else entirely. She saw herself at 7 years old, sitting on those steps, eating a sweet potato pie, listening to Opal sing hymns through the open kitchen window. She pressed her palm flat against the front door, closed her eyes, and whispered what she had been carrying inside for 2 decades. I stood, Grandma, just like you taught me. She didn't buy the building. She bought the entire block. And she didn't demolish it. She rebuilt it, brick by brick, unit by unit, into affordable housing for single mothers and families starting over. She named it Opal Monroe Place. There was no press release, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no cameras. Just a small brass plaque beside the front door that read, "You are more than what they see." The Opal Monroe Foundation launched quietly that same year. It funded women's shelters across the East Coast. It covered legal fees for women escaping abusive marriages who couldn't afford an attorney. It paid school tuition for children whose mothers were rebuilding their lives from the ground up. It built a counseling center in East Baltimore, a warm, clean, safe space where women could sit across from someone who understood exactly what it felt like to cry behind a locked bathroom door, wipe your face, and walk out with your back straight and your voice steady. Denise didn't give interviews. She didn't accept awards. She didn't pose for magazine covers or speak at conferences. The foundation spoke for itself, and within 18 months it was operating across 12 states, funding programs that touched thousands of women's lives. Women who had been told they were nothing, women who had been slapped and silenced and dismissed, women who were learning day by day that they were more than what the world had tried to make them believe. Her 2 children, her son, 14, and her daughter, 11, learned the full truth that year. They sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening and listened as their mother told them everything. She told them about Lorraine, about the patent, about the trust, about Opal and the locket, about the 15 years she kept silent, and about why she finally chose to speak. Her son sat quietly for a long time. Then he asked the question that had been sitting behind his eyes since the night of the gala. "Did you ever hate Dad?" Denise looked at her son, at this boy who had his father's jawline and his grandmother's steady eyes, and shook her head slowly. "No, baby," she said softly. "I never hated him. I grieved him, like losing someone who was still alive. And that's worse than hate. That's what happens when somebody you love chooses, every single day, not to see you." Her daughter picked up the gold locket from the table and turned it over in her small hands. She opened it carefully and read the note inside. "You are more than what they see." She looked up at her mother with wide, clear eyes and said, "You really are, Mama." Denise gathered both children against her chest and held them there. And for the first time since that night at the gala, she allowed herself to cry. Not from pain, not from anger, from relief, from the deep, spreading warmth of being truly known by the people who matter most. The children didn't hate their father. Denise never asked them to. She never poisoned them with bitterness or taught them to carry her wounds. But they chose her, not from obligation, from recognition. They had spent years watching their mother carry silence like armor. They had watched her absorb insults at dinner tables and walk home with her head high. They had watched her stand when the whole world expected her to break. And they understood, even at their age, that strength is not the loudest voice in the room. It's the one that waits, and then speaks last. On a warm evening in late September, Denise sat on the front porch of a small house she had purchased 3 blocks from Opal's old building. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, not a monument to wealth or revenge.